After paying insurance for over 25 years, they still denied my $8,000 surgery. So I fought back, exposed the loophole they didn't want me to know about, and helped hundreds of seniors avoid the same trap. I have worked since I was 17. For most of my life, I've believed in doing the right thing. Pay your bills, show up on time, take care of your family, and prepare for the future. I'm not rich, never have been, but I've always done my best to live honestly and take care of what I can. For the past 22 years, I've been working at a small public library. It's not a glamorous job, but I loved it. I love books. I love people. I love helping someone find exactly what they're looking for, even if it's just a quiet place to sit for an hour. I raised 2 daughters while working there. I helped my late husband through cancer treatments there. And during all those years, I never let my insurance payments lapse. I paid every month. No missed bills, no delays. I didn't just rely on work insurance. I bought supplemental coverage too. Because after my husband passed, I realized how expensive the medical world really is. Hospitals don't ask if you're ready. They ask if you can pay. And if you can't, you either suffer in silence or drown in debt. That's how it works. So when my knees started hurting, I didn't panic. I thought, good thing I've got insurance. My right knee was worse than the left. I could barely bend it some days. It would swell, pop, even lock up while I was shelving books or walking down the library steps. I tried to ignore it at first. Just wear a brace, take over-the-counter pain pills. But eventually the pain became too much. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even take a full shift without sitting down between every other task. My boss, a kind woman named Joy, gently told me it was time to go see someone. So referred me to a specialist, who referred me to an orthopedic surgeon. The surgeon did some scans, checked the joint, and told me what I had already figured out. I needed surgery, full knee replacement. I wasn't surprised. I had prepared for this mentally. I thought, fine, let's do it. Let's get this behind me. Let me get back to living without pain. Let me keep working a few more years. Let me walk without limping or wincing every time I step off a curb. I remember the day he gave me the cost estimate, $8,000 out of pocket. That's after insurance. I didn't panic. I thought, okay, I've got coverage. I've been paying into this system since before some of these billing clerks were born. I'll fight for approval if I have to. This is what insurance is for. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I have learned things I wish I never had to learn. That insurance doesn't always mean coverage. That policies don't guarantee care. That paperwork matters more than people. And that even after years of paying faithfully, they can say no. And they did. They denied the surgery. After multiple appointments, after scans, after letters from my doctor and surgeon, they said the surgery was not medically necessary at this time. They said I had not completed enough non-surgical treatment options. They said physical therapy should continue for at least 6 more weeks before any surgical action was considered. They said there was no evidence my condition had deteriorated enough to justify it. I couldn't believe it. I cried in the parking lot that day. Full-grown woman, sitting in her car holding a denial letter, sobbing like a child. My knee still hurts. It's getting worse, not better. I've done the therapy. I've done the exercises. I've followed every instruction, every step. I've iced it, wrapped it, braced it. I've tried the injections. Nothing helps long term. I called the insurance company myself. I thought maybe if I just talked to someone, they'd understand. I spoke with a man named Carl. He was polite, but distant. He read from a script. I told him I had been paying premiums for 22 years. I asked him if he thought it was fair. Prosecute. Then said he understood my frustration and that I could appeal the decision if I wanted. Appeal. That word now feels like a wall. But I did it anyway. I wrote the appeal myself. I included copies of my medical history, letters from my doctor, notes from physical therapy, and a photo of my swollen knee on a particularly bad day. Then I waited. That was 5 weeks ago. I've heard nothing. I still go to work part-time. I still limp up the library steps. I still take pain medicine before bed just so I can sleep a few hours. And every time I do, I wonder what happened to the promise of care. What happened to the system we were told would be there when we needed it? I don't want pity. I don't want to yell. I just want help. I just want the surgery that was recommended by my doctor. I want to walk like a person again. Wanting of my story, it gets more complicated from here, but I wanted to share it. Not because I think I'm special, but because I know I'm not the only one. Others are going through this too. If you are, I'm so sorry. Weeks passed. I checked the mailbox every day like it mattered more than anything else in the world. Every rustle of paper gave me a jolt of hope. Maybe today would be the day. Maybe the insurance company would send a letter. Maybe a human being somewhere in their tall glass office tower read my appeal and said yes. But the days kept going, and the mailbox stayed empty except for flyers and credit card offers I would never accept. So I called again. Grandparents for 37 minutes. A woman finally picked up. Her name was Shelley. I remember it because she was the first screen. I told her everything. My knee, the pain, my work, the bills, the appeal I sent weeks ago. I asked her if it was even received. She told me yes, it was marked as received and is currently in review. She said they were behind and it could take another 4 to 6 weeks. I asked her if there was anything I could do to speed it up. She said no, but she could note the urgency on the file. I wanted to scream, but I just said, "Thank you," and hung up. It know how long that is when you're in constant pain? When you're limping through the day and swallowing pain pills just to stand? It's not 6 weeks, it's 6 lifetimes. Time moves different when you're hurting. I started to wake up in the middle of the night with my knee burning. I'd sit up in bed, wrap a towel around it, and cry quietly because I didn't want my daughters to worry. My oldest, Danielle, is a nurse. She's strong, independent, and busy. My youngest, Haley, teaches 4th grade and has 2 kids of her own. They both offered to help me pay for the surgery out of pocket. But I told them no, absolutely not. I said, this is what I have insurance for. I said I'd handle it. I'm their mother, not their burden. But the truth is, some nights I sat there and thought about it. Thought about saying yes. Thought about borrowing the money. But I knew that once you start down that path, it doesn't stop at $8,000. It grows. It becomes hospital bills, recovery care, maybe time off work without pay, maybe extra therapy. One step leads to the next, and suddenly I've passed a line I can't walk back over. So I waited. During that time, my supervisor at the library started making accommodations for me. She gave me a rolling chair to shelve books, let me skip stairs, let me sit during check-ins. She was kind, but I saw the look in her eyes. It was concern. She didn't say it out loud, but I knew what it meant. If I got worse, they'd have to talk about options. I might not be able to keep my job. And that thought terrified me more than the surgery. Need this job, not just for the money, for the dignity, for the feeling that I'm still part of something, still useful, still standing on my own. A few more weeks passed. Finally, a letter came. Windshield, I opened it in my kitchen with shaking hands. I read the first line and felt my stomach drop. Denied. Again. The letter said that based on the reviewed materials, they were maintaining their decision that surgery was not yet warranted. It suggested a second round of physical therapy and referred me to a pain management pathway that included a list of clinics and specialists that I'd never heard of. It read like it had been written by someone who never saw my file, like I was just another box checked on a list. Your lungs, the kind where you lean against the kitchen counter and wonder what you did wrong in your life to deserve this. I called Danielle that night and told her. I could hear the anger in her voice. She said we should go to the news, make it public. She said they couldn't treat people like this. She even offered to call the insurance company herself. But I told her no. I told her to let me handle it. I still don't know if that was pride, or fear, or both. The next day I went to the library like normal. Joy pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. I lied and said yes. But then something strange happened. One of our regular patrons, Mr. Lyle, an older gentleman who reads the newspaper every morning by the window, noticed my limp. He asked me how long my knee had been bothering me. I said it had been a while. He asked if I had seen anyone. I told him yes, but insurance was delaying everything. He nodded quietly, then pulled out a small card from his coat pocket and handed it to me. Palestinians, you said, call this number. They help people like you. They helped my sister when her treatment was denied. It was a legal advocacy group that worked with patients denied coverage by insurance. I had never even heard of such a thing. I took the card home and stared at it for a day before calling. While I was connected with a woman named Marisol, she listened, really listened. Then she asked if I had copies of everything. I said yes. She said send them. I did. That one call started something I didn't expect. For the first time, someone was in my corner who understood the system from the inside. She explained what they look for, how to word appeals, what evidence matters most. She said my paperwork was solid, but needed stronger medical language. Patient rights advocate, who helped me write a new appeal, one that included direct statements from my surgeon, using terms the reviewers couldn't ignore, words like degenerative joint failure and irreversible deterioration. They even helped get a letter from the physical therapist stating that my progress had plateaued and non-surgical options were exhausted. Credel was submitted, this time with legal guidance attached. It was marked urgent due to ongoing pain and risk of complications. All I could do was wait again. I wasn't waiting alone. I had someone with me. And for the first time in months, I had a little hope. This wasn't over yet. Not even close. The letter arrived. It was a thick envelope this time, not a single-page denial like before. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it on my kitchen table for a long time. There's a kind of fear that comes with hope when you've been let down before. You want to believe things are about to change, but your scared insurance company said they would approve the knee replacement only if I agreed to go through a third-party surgical review panel first. They called it a secondary evaluation. I had to meet with one of their assigned orthopedic specialists to confirm the original diagnosis and treatment plan. At first, I was confused. Wasn't that what my own doctor had already done? What was this extra step? Marisol explained it to me over the phone. She said insurance companies sometimes use these panels to slow things down, hoping patients will give up or settle for alternative treatments. But I wasn't giving up. Not now. I scheduled the appointment. It was in a clinic 45 minutes from my home. My daughter Haley drove me because I was afraid my knee wouldn't hold up on the bus ride. I remember sitting in the waiting room surrounded by strangers, wondering how many of them were there for the same reason: denied care, fighting for what they'd already paid for. Doctor I met with was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, tall, polite, clean white coat. He looked at my records, examined my knee, asked a few questions, and then sat down with a serious expression. He told me that based on what he had reviewed and what he had seen in person, he would recommend proceeding with surgery. He said delaying longer could worsen the damage and reduce the success of recovery. He said I was a candidate. He said he would submit his report immediately. I felt like I had been holding my breath for 3 months and finally exhaled. 1 week later, the final letter came. Approved. Surgery approved. $8,000 out of pocket, but everything else was covered. I cried again that day, but it was different. Not sadness, not frustration. This was release. This was something leaving me that I didn't even know I was carrying. I called Danielle and Haley and told them. They cried too. Joy at the library hugged me when I told her. She even offered to set up a donation jar at the front desk to help with the cost, but I told her no. I didn't want charity. I just wanted a chance. I scheduled the surgery. Bernstein, it would happen 3 weeks later at a hospital an hour away. I had to arrange time off work. My daughters took turns preparing to help me through recovery. Danielle used some of her nurse contacts to find the best post-op therapy program in the area. Haley arranged for me to stay with her for the first few days after discharge, so I wouldn't be alone. I spent those 3 weeks preparing. I cleaned my apartment. I stocked the freezer. I organized my bills and wrote instructions for where everything was in case someone needed to step in. I wasn't scared of the surgery itself. I was scared of going through all of this and something going wrong. But there was also something. Now, finally, I had a date, a plan, a way forward. The night before the surgery, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at the ceiling, thinking about my husband. If he had been alive, he would have made jokes to distract me. He would have driven me to the hospital and waited in the lobby with a book, probably something historical or dramatic. I missed him more than usual that night, but I also felt like he would have been proud of me. The morning came fast. Danielle picked me up before sunrise. We drove mostly in silence. There's something about hospitals that make conversation hard. Too many emotions waiting just under the surface. Check-in was smooth. I signed the paperwork. I put on the gown. I laid on the table under the bright lights with nurses moving gently around me. One of them asked me if I was nervous. I said no. I said I had been ready for this for a long time. Transporting thing I remember before the anesthesia took hold was looking up at the ceiling tiles and thinking, finally, someone listened. Finally, someone did the right thing. Finally, I get to feel like a person again. Waking up from surgery is a strange thing. It's not like in the movies. You don't sit up and blink and start talking. You drift in and out. You hear voices, but they feel far away. You feel pressure before pain. And when the pain comes, it's slow, dull, then sharp when you try to move. The vision thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the light above me. Then the clock. Then my knee, wrapped tightly. I couldn't feel it at first. Then I tried shifting slightly, and the pain came like a wave. Not the pain I had before. This was new, clean, surgical. The kind you expect after someone's been inside your body, cutting and fixing. A nurse leaned over me and said, "You're okay, Amelia. Surgery went well." I tried to say thank you, but it came out like a whisper. I was tired. So tired. I spent 1 night in the hospital, then 2 more at a recovery center before going to Haley's house. Those first few days, I felt like a baby again. I needed help walking, eating, standing, using the bathroom. My daughters took shifts helping me. Danielle was calm and clinical. Haley was softer, always asking if I needed water or a blanket or just company. The physical therapy started quickly, too quickly in my opinion. They came to Haley's house and had me do small movements. Just lifting my leg a few inches was like climbing a mountain. I cried during the first session, not because of the pain, because of the helplessness. I've always been strong, always been the one holding everyone else up. Now here I was, struggling to lift my leg off the couch, needing someone to help me places that had nothing to do with my knee. My back hurt from lying down. My arms were tired from pushing off the bed. I felt embarrassed asking Haley for help with things like bathing or getting into the car. She never made me feel ashamed, but I felt it anyway. One night, after a particularly rough day, I sat in the guest room staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my hair messy, my eyes tired. I looked like a stranger. I thought, what if this never gets better? What if I did all this for nothing? Proportional, I didn't say that out loud. I kept it inside. But the next day, something changed. Danielle came by after work. She brought me a notebook. On the first page she had written, "What I did today, even the little things." She told me to write something down every day, even if it was small. Even if it was just, "I stood up without help," or "I walked to the bathroom alone." She said it helps track progress when your brain can't see it on its own. So I did. Fiberglass was, "I put on socks without help." Abandonment, "Walked 20 steps." N, "Took a shower and didn't cry." Negligent and silly now, but those little victories kept me going. They were proof that the pain had a purpose, that I wasn't stuck, that something inside me was healing. Come into the room and give me drawings. One of them was of a superhero grandma, with a cape and a big bandage on her leg. I laughed so hard I almost forgot the pain. 3 weeks in, I started going to the clinic for outpatient therapy. They had parallel bars I could hold while I practiced walking. At first, it felt like learning to walk again. My balance was off, my legs shook, but by the end of the first week there, I could take 6 full steps without holding the rails. That day, I cried in the car. Happy tears. Nexus just because of the progress, but because I was starting to feel like myself again. During therapy, an older man named Leonard struck up a conversation. He had his knee replaced last year. He told me it was the best decision he ever made. But he said something that stuck with me. Communicator said, "The pain changes, but it teaches you something. It reminds you you're still alive." I didn't understand what he meant until that night. Because that evening, while sitting on Haley's porch with an ice pack on my knee and the sound of her kids laughing in the yard, I realized something. I had survived. Not just the surgery, but the months before it. The doubt, the fear, the helplessness. I had made it through. I still had a long way. Walked over quickly, holding her arms out, but not hugging too tightly, knowing my body still needed space. She said, "Welcome back, Amelia. We missed you." I said, "I missed this place too." The staff had decorated the break room with a little banner that read, "Welcome back, Amelia," in colorful letters. There were sugar-free cookies and tea. Someone even brought in sunflowers, my favorite. I thanked them all and tried not to cry, but returning to work wasn't as easy as walking through the door. The first day back, I worked just 4 hours. My leg felt stiff, and I had to rest a few times in the staff chair behind the desk. I noticed the small changes immediately. New computer software, a new volunteer at the kids' corner, a few regular patrons who had stopped coming, and a few new faces who didn't know who I was. Confiscal, I found comfort in the routine, scanning books, helping people find titles, answering questions from teens working on school projects. A man asked where to find Civil War memoirs, and I guided him right to the shelf, like I'd done 100 times before. My body might have been slower, but my mind was still sharp, and that felt good. Position something else happened that week. On my second day back, I was organizing books when a man walked in who looked vaguely familiar. He waited at the counter for me to finish. When I turned to help him, he smiled and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" He can hard. Then it clicked. Peacefully, it was Mr. Lyle, the quiet man who read the newspaper every day by the window, the same man who handed me the card for the patient advocacy group. Invoked the book I was holding. I thanked him. I told him everything, the appeal, the surgery, the recovery, the second chance. He listened with a soft smile and said, "I'm glad you didn't give up." Then he nodded once and walked over to the newspaper rack, like it was just another day. That small moment stayed with me for a long time. Sometimes help comes from the quietest places. But not everything was back to normal. Around the 3rd week back, I started noticing something odd. My leg would ache at night, not the same pain as before, but a deep soreness that felt like it came from inside the bone. I pushed through it at first. I told myself it was just part of healing. Tightened, then I started limping again. I didn't want to admit it, my dawed away. But one night, after work, I sat on the couch with my leg propped up and felt a sharp pulse shoot through my knee like lightning. I yelped and dropped my tea. That's when I knew something was wrong. Danielle took me back to the doctor the next morning. They ran scans and found some fluid buildup around the implant. Nothing dangerous yet, but it meant more therapy and possibly draining the fluid if it didn't resolve. It hit me hard. After all that fighting, all that recovery isn't a straight line. It loops. It stumbles. And sometimes it reminds you that even healed wounds can ache. Still, I kept working. I did my stretches. I followed the doctor's advice. And through it all, something unexpected began to happen. People started coming to me with their own stories. A woman at the library told me her husband had been denied a cancer screening because of a clerical error. A young teacher said her father had been denied heart medication due to a formulary issue. A grandmother said her insurance stopped covering her back injections and she couldn't afford them on her fixed income. I shared my story too. I gave them the name of the advocacy group Marisol worked with. I told them not to give up. Before I knew it, I became a kind of resource. Not just the librarian, but someone people came to when they felt lost in the system. One afternoon, Joy pulled me into her office. She said the city was starting a senior outreach program and wanted the library to host informational sessions on healthcare literacy. They needed someone to help organize it. She asked if I'd be interested. I said yes, without thinking. Not because I needed more work, but because I knew how it felt to be on the other side. Confused, hurting, scared. And I wanted to be the voice that said, "You're not alone." By the end of that month, we had set up our first workshop. Flyers went out, chairs were arranged. I stood at the front of the room with a slight limp still in my step, but a clear voice in my throat. I shared my story. I answered questions. I handed out phone numbers and brochures. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my knee gave out. Purpose. Not just recovery, not just survival, but something more. Something worth standing for, even when standing still hurts. A few weeks after the first senior workshop at the library, I came home to find a letter waiting in my mailbox. It didn't have a return address, just my name, written in slightly shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. I took it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at it for a minute before opening it. Inside was a folded note on plain paper, and a photo. I unfolded the note first. It read, "I saw the article about you and the insurance fight. I don't know if you'll remember me. My name is June. We met a long time ago at St. Teresa's. You were the girl with the blue coat and the braids who always walked home with her head down. I always wondered what happened to you. I'm glad to see you're still fighting." Submissive. Unthinkable. That was the school I went to in 6th grade for just 1 year. A private school, full of uniforms and strict nuns. I was the new girl, shy, poor, wearing hand-me-down shoes and the wrong kind of backpack. And I remembered June. Friends, but I remembered her smile. I looked at the photo. It was old, faded, black and white, with curled edges. A group shot of the 6th grade class standing outside the old brick building. And there I was, 2nd row, 3rd from the left, braids and blue coat, eyes too big for my face. I hadn't seen that picture in over 50 years. I sat back and let out a long breath. Memory is a strange thing. You think you've forgotten something completely, and then one letter pulls it all back like it never left. The smell of chalk, the creak of wooden floors, the feeling of sitting alone at recess and pretending you didn't mind. A lot from that year. My father was sick back then. My mother worked long hours. That was the year I learned how to keep quiet and make myself small. The year I learned not to expect much. Championing that picture and reading June's letter made something stir inside me. Blinked because it reminded me that even back then, people noticed. Even when you feel invisible, someone sees you, even if it takes 50 years for the connection to come back around. Wrote June back. I remembered the pencils. I told her about the surgery, the recovery, the workshops at the library. I told her that her letter had arrived on a day when I wasn't feeling strong, and that she reminded me of who I've always been. Someone who keeps going even when the road is steep. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 weeks later she wrote again. We started writing letters regularly after that. Real letters, pen on paper. No emails, no texting. Just 2 women reconnecting after half a century, trading stories about families, books, old memories, and new lessons. One day she told me about her own health scare. She had a heart procedure the year before. Similar story. Denial, delay, paperwork. She fought too, and she won too. We joked that maybe St. Teresa's made us stubborn by accident. Flushed, but her letter also reminded me of something I'd started to forget. Bilingual, that the system doesn't always get better. That there are still people out there hurting, waiting, wondering if anyone will help them. So I kept working workshop. More people came this time. Word had spread. One woman told me she came because her neighbor said, "Go see the library lady. She knows about insurance stuff." Flooded a library lady. It made me laugh, but it also made me proud. I started emotionally. I felt steady. Not just healed, but fuller than I'd been in years. But one night, as I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and a stack of letters from June, I started thinking about something I hadn't allowed myself to think about before. What would have happened if I hadn't fought? If I had accepted that first denial? Lineback, if I'd given up like they hoped I would? I'd still be limping, still be hurting, still be quietly suffering, still be wondering if I mattered. That question, do I matter, lives in more people than we realize. And sometimes all it takes to answer it is a voice that says, yes, you do. That's what June did for me. That's what Marisol did for me. And that's what I wanted to do for someone else. The phone rang just after 7 in the evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a half-read letter from June, a lukewarm cup of tea, and one of those little heating pads wrapped around my knee. At first, I didn't even want to answer. I was tired. It had been a long day. We had hosted a small group at the library about Medicare questions, and I'd spent hours listening, guiding, and encouraging people who were just as overwhelmed as I had once been. Fingerprints told me to pick up. When I said hello, the voice on the other end made me sit up straight. It was Margaret. I hadn't heard that voice in more than 20 years. Margaret used to be my closest friend. We met in our 20s, worked side by side at the same school library before I transferred to the city branch. We had the kind of friendship that felt like family. Dinners together, weekend walks. I helped her through her divorce. She helped me through the loss of my husband. But then, slowly, life pulled us in different directions. She moved across the state. Her mother got sick. I got busy with work and the girls. And then one day we just stopped calling. There was no fight, no final moment, just space, years of it. Now, here she was, out of the blue. She had seen my name in a community newsletter. Someone had shared the story of the senior healthcare workshops and mentioned my name in the library. She said she read it twice, not believing it was really me. Then she picked up the phone and called. I was shocked at first, then emotional, then embarrassed that so much time had passed. But she didn't sound distant. She sounded warm, familiar, like time hadn't built a wall between us after all. Windchilled for nearly 2 hours that night. She told me about her grandchildren, her knee problems, her recent struggle with a denied dental surgery that she ended up paying for herself. I told her about everything. The pain, the denial.
Been quiet. Not the kind to make noise, not the kind to complain or raise my voice in public. I was taught to be polite, to be respectful, to trust the system. But pain changes that. Being dismissed changes that. Losing your health and having to beg for help changes that. We talked more over the next few weeks. Phone calls, emails, pictures of grandchildren. Then one morning she said, "You should come speak at our senior center." Thought she wasn't. She lived 3 hours away. Her neighborhood had a small community space where retirees gathered for events, book clubs, and healthcare talks. She said they were looking for someone to speak about insurance advocacy, someone who understood what it felt like to be denied and ignored and still push through. She said, "You're exactly the person they need to hear from." I laughed, nervously. I had only ever spoken at the library. I wasn't a public speaker. I didn't own fancy clothes or a slideshow. But she said that wasn't what people needed. They needed truth, and I had plenty of that. So I said yes. Uzbekter scheduled the talk for the last Saturday of the month. I asked Danielle to drive me, just in case my leg got sore during the trip. She agreed right away and even helped me organize a small outline of things to cover. Haley printed extra copies of the insurance resource guide and added my contact number in case anyone wanted to ask questions afterward. Argert's town felt like stepping into a new chapter. The sky was clear. The roads were calm. Danielle and I talked the whole way about nothing in particular. It felt good to be in motion, like life was carrying me towards something bigger than I had planned. Modest building with pale yellow walls and a wooden deck out front. Inside there were rows of chairs, a small podium, and maybe 30 people waiting, some with walkers, some with canes, some in wheelchairs, some alone, some holding hands. They looked at me with quiet curiosity when I stepped in. I stood at the front, knees steady, voice ready, and I began. I told them everything, discharged in a dramatic way, just plainly. The pain, the process, the confusion, the fear, the appeal, the way I almost gave up, the way I found help, the way I found my voice. I told them that being quiet doesn't mean being weak, lingering them that age doesn't mean invisibility. And I told them that the system doesn't always help us, but that doesn't mean we have to sit in silence. They listened. They nodded. Some took notes, some cried. Unborn, they lined up to speak with me. One woman hugged me and whispered that her son had been denied cancer treatment. One man said he hadn't seen a doctor in 2 years because he was afraid of what his insurance might not cover. Another woman asked, "Recovering anymore?" I was becoming someone I never thought I could be. Someone who wasn't just surviving the system, but helping others survive it too. Margaret hugged me before I left. She said, "Promise me you'll keep doing this. You're the kind of person who makes people believe they're not alone." And I did promise. Because I know now what it means to feel invisible, and I know now how powerful it is to be seen. It was a Tuesday morning, just after 10, when the phone rang again. I had just poured myself a second cup of coffee and was sorting through the new delivery of books at the library. My knee was feeling stronger that week, and I was finally moving without much of a limp. I was humming to myself when the phone on the desk rang with a long-distance area code I didn't recognize.
I answered like always, cheerful and calm. The voice on the other end said, "Hello, is this Amelia Parker? Persistence?" I said yes, and he introduced himself as Raymond Westbrook, a host from a regional radio show focused on public services, senior issues, and local stories of impact. Unprotected. He said he had read about my workshops. He said he spoke to someone from the community center Margaret had invited me to. He said the story moved him, and that his team had been talking about doing a segment on patient rights and the challenges of health coverage. Then he asked the question that made me nearly drop my coffee mug. "Would you be willing to speak on air about your experience?" I froze. For a moment I didn't know what to say. Administered? On the radio? I had never done anything like that before. I'd spoken in rooms, yes, small rooms, libraries, community centers. I had seen the eyes of the people listening, but this was different. A microphone, a broadcast, thousands of people I couldn't see. I told him I'd think about it. That night I sat on my couch, hands folded, tea untouched, and just stared out the window. The sky had that gray-blue color it gets when fall is just starting to show. The wind was quiet. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge. What would I say? What if I said the wrong thing? What if my voice cracked, or I forgot my words, or no one cared? But then I remembered something Mr. Lyle once told me when I was still using a walker. He said, "You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. You just need to speak with truth. People hear that more than anything." So I called Raymond back the next morning. I said yes. Danielle offered to come over and sit with me during the call. She even helped me go over a few things I wanted to say. We practiced my story like it was a script, but she reminded me not to memorize anything. My heart was racing. I could hear the producer on the other end introducing me. Then the host came on. His voice was warm, professional, easy to talk to. He welcomed me and asked me to share how it all started. And so I did. First denial letter, about the knee pain that nearly stole my independence, about the calls, the wait, the second denial, the support I found from strangers, the appeal, the victory, the surgery, the pain, the slow and stubborn healing, and how I found purpose again, not just in walking, but in helping others walk their own path. I didn't speak with polish, flushing, with memory, with truth. He asked me what kept me going. I said, "I think when you've spent your life helping others, it's hard to ask for help. But sometimes asking is what leads you to your strength." He asked me what advice I had for other seniors listening, who were struggling with insurance or medical denials. Pilgrimage. I told him 3 things. Don't throw the first letter away. Keep it. Read it. Highlight the words. Denial isn't the end. Ask for help. There are people who understand this world better than we do. Patient advocates, social workers. Sometimes even your pharmacist knows more than the insurance rep. And the third thing? Don't be afraid to speak up, even if your voice shakes, even if you feel like no one's listening. Keep speaking. There was a pause on the line. Then the host thanked me and said I had just moved a lot of people. Didn't cry during the call. Pledged. But when it ended, and I sat in the silence that followed, I did. Not because I was proud, but because somewhere out there, someone like me was sitting in a kitchen, holding a denial letter, wondering if they mattered. And maybe now, they would know they do. Constrained day, I got an email from someone I had never met. She was 71, living 2 states away, and had just received a denial letter for her back surgery. She wrote that she heard me on the radio, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel stupid or alone. Fiberglass about one email felt like 1,000 thank yous. The radio host invited me back the following month. Yes, again. Hall calls started coming. A small news outlet wanted to do a short piece. A community health group asked for a recorded version of my story to play at their annual gathering. I even received a handwritten letter from a man who said he played my radio interview for his whole family, over dinner, because he wanted his grandchildren to understand what perseverance sounded like. It was overwhelming. Patriotism. Not in a bad way, in the kind of way that made you sit quietly at night and realize that the worst moments of your life sometimes open the door to your greatest purpose. I still worked at the library, while shelved books, pilgrimage, struggled with joy, and refilled the paper in the printers, and answered questions about late fees and reading recommendations. There was something new growing now, a voice, negligence, and it wasn't just mine anymore. It was the voice of everyone who'd ever felt ignored, who had waited on hold too long, who had stared at forms they didn't understand, who had felt like their age made them invisible. I was speaking for them now, and they were starting to speak too. The library had become more than just a building again. It was a living place, a second home, a small quiet stage where stories unfolded every day, not only between the pages of books, but also in the people who walked through the doors. It was a Thursday afternoon when she came in. She looked no older than 25, a little rushed, holding a stack of folders and an old cloth bag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes darted around like she was looking for someone, or maybe trying to make up her mind about turning around and leaving. I was behind the front desk checking returns when she walked up. Her voice was soft. She asked if she could speak to someone about, and then she trailed off. She didn't finish her sentence. I asked if she needed help with a book. She shook her head. "I heard about the woman who runs the healthcare group here. I think it's you." Wellnaya nodded slowly and set my paperwork aside. We sat at one of the small wooden tables near the large window in the back. Sunlight spilled across the floor, and the hum of the building faded into the background. She placed the folders on the table and opened the first one. Inside were bills. Medical bills. So many of them. Some were stapled together, others wrinkled and torn at the edges from being opened and folded and opened again. One envelope had a bright red stamp on the front. Past due. She told me her name was Leah. She said her mother had gotten sick last year. Pancreatic cancer. She was only 58, no family history, no warning. One day she had stomach pain, and 6 months later she was gone. Leah had quit her job to take care of her full time. She said no one really explained what hospice would involve, or how the billing would work, or what happened when the insurance company started denying certain services because they were considered comfort care and not medically necessary. Not medically necessary. As if dignity and comfort at the end of life were somehow optional. Just to her words, but to her breathing, the pauses, the way her hands shook slightly when she touched the papers. She was still in the storm, just barely on the edge of grief. But more than that, she was angry, not loud, not wild, just quietly, heartbreakingly angry. She told me she'd been trying to make sense of the bills. She had used most of her savings. She was getting collection notices. She hadn't had the energy to fight it while her mother was still alive. But now she didn't know what to do. I felt something stir in me I hadn't felt in a while, something protective. I told her what I knew, how to request itemized statements, reshape to ask for debt verification, how some hospices have financial forgiveness departments, psychologists down the number of the patient advocacy line I had used. Presumption I did something I hadn't done before. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the small donation envelope labeled Quiet Aid. It wasn't official. It was just something Joy and I had started quietly a few months ago. A few community members had donated after one of the workshops. We kept it tucked away for moments like this. Migrated her $200 in cash. She shook her head and said she couldn't take it. Quotations, "It's not a handout. It's a bridge. Sometimes we just need something to help us get across to the next day." Combating. Not loud. Just soft tears. The kind that fall when you realize someone actually sees you. When the weight doesn't go away but someone shifts just enough of it so you can breathe again. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "I thought the system was meant to help people." I told her what I'd learned. It helps some. It forgets others. But people like you, people who remember their mothers and still choose to fight, you're the ones who change it. Pedestrians, I sat in my living room with a lamp on, and the photo from St. Teresa's in my hand again. I thought about how many people walk through the world thinking no one sees them, no one hears them, no one will ever show up for them. And then one stranger reaches out, or one old friend calls, or one librarian says, "Let's sit down and talk." Bathrooms. Something begins to shift. Negligence, it isn't always big, but it's real. The next day, Leah came back. She brought a thank you card and 2 sandwiches from the shop across the street. We ate together at the same table, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. She said she had made a plan. She had started calling the numbers I gave her. She made a list. She was going to write letters. She said, "I might not win, but I won't just let them bury me under this." Blankets, I told her, that's what makes you strong. Not the money, not the paperwork. The choice to stand up anyway. Watching her walk out of the library, shoulders a little straighter, steps a little more certain, I realized something else. Northeastern, everything I had gone through, the denial, the pain, the surgery, the recovery, the workshops, the letters, the interviews. Holding my breath without realizing it. It was from the Office of Community Services. They wanted to formally recognize the work I had done. They said the workshops had helped over 300 people so far, that word of mouth had brought people from outside the city, that other libraries had started asking for the pamphlets, that one of the advocacy groups we partnered with had credited the library program for improving local healthcare access. But that wasn't all. A new position. Flush just a librarian, not just a workshop host. Windshield wanted me to take a part-time role as the director of senior health advocacy for the district. It was a pilot role, focused on training other libraries to do what we'd done here, creating simple support guides, hosting safe discussions, building small bridges for people who had never been taught how to ask questions or demand answers. At first I just stared at the paper. Me, a director. I was 63. I still iced my knee every night. I still double-checked every form I filled out. I didn't have a degree in public health. I didn't have a fancy resume. But I had something else. I had lived it. I knew what it felt like to be denied, to be afraid, to be confused by the system and forgotten by the people who were supposed to care. I knew what it felt like to be seen again, to be heard, to matter. I took the letter home and sat with it for a few days. Danielle came over, read it, and smiled like she already knew what I was going to do. Haley brought over a little notebook and said, "If you're going to do this, I'll help design whatever you need, flyers, brochures, you name it." Even Margaret called when she heard. She said, "I can't think of anyone more perfect for the job." But I wasn't so sure. I was tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. The kind that lives in your bones after you fought too long without rest. The kind that makes you wonder if you're supposed to slow down instead of start again. So I took a walk. I went down the old trail near the park, the same one my husband and I used to walk together before his heart gave out years ago. I sat on the same bench where we used to rest, watching the birds and the soft way the light danced between the trees. I thought about the first time I felt that sharp pain in my knee, and tried to pretend it wasn't serious. I thought about that first denial letter, the feeling of disbelief, of betrayal, of helplessness. I thought about Mr. Lyle, and June, and Margaret, and the man on the radio, and Leah, and then I thought about everyone who hadn't found their voice yet, who still had that envelope on the kitchen table unopened, that bill with red letters, that quiet shame that comes from being told they aren't worth the care they need. I knew what I had to do. I backed to the library.
Me. Refrain. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like my life wasn't just restarting. It was rising. The following months were full of motion. Meetings, introductions, learning to speak to bigger groups, writing guides, sitting with strangers who quickly became something more. The work was hard, but it was good. It was honest. We trained 3 more libraries that year. We helped 250 new people get through confusing insurance processes. We hosted a series of evening talks with local doctors and legal aid. We helped one man get his wife's heart surgery covered after 2 years of denials. And through it all, I kept shelving books. Because some parts of you don't go away. They just get deeper, stronger. One evening, just before closing, I stood near the large window where I used to shelve biographies. I watched an older man guide his wife gently down the ramp. Her steps were slow, but he held her hand like it was made of porcelain. And for a moment, I saw myself again, the way I once walked, the way I once hoped. I thought about how close I came to giving up, how everything that happened, the denial, the pain, the surgery, the radio, the workshops, none of it would have happened if I had just given up. But I didn't. Bustling because something inside me, maybe something planted long ago when I was just a girl with braids and a blue coat, told me I still had something worth fighting for. And now, I get to help others find that something too. Sometimes it's not about shouting louder. It's about standing still and letting someone know you see them, and that they matter, that they're not broken, just tired, that they still belong here, just like I do. Thank you for listening to my story. Like and subscribe for more true stories that matter.